Scene 1, the Violet Office.
The office was a sensory assault. Kayleen had traded the corporate morgue aesthetic for a palette of electric violet and acid green. The floor was a polished emerald marble, reflecting the crimson neon sign on the far wall that simply read, "Loyalty," a searing, sarcastic joke only Kayleen understood. Marcus Vane, the man who had once systematically dismantled the Johnson family, was reduced to a shivering ghost. He sat in a chair of tangerine leather, his expensive suit hanging off a frame, weakened by stress. He was leaning so far forward he was nearly off the seat, his voice a frantic, low-pitched plea. He was begging for mercy, for a bailout, for a shred of the loyalty he had so expertly faked decades ago. Kayleen's own performance was terrifyingly precise. He sat with his hands folded neatly on the yellow desk, his head bowed so deeply it looked as if he were worshipping at Marcus's feet. To any spy watching through the glass, it appeared the young heir was ready to kowtow to his father's legendary partner. But beneath that bowed head, Kayleen's face was a mask of cold stone. He was enjoying the vibration of Marcus's desperate voice against the acrylic desk. As Marcus babbled about old times and the bond between brothers, Kayleen's mind replayed the history Marcus thought remained hidden. He thought of his father, Arthur Johnson. Arthur had been a novice in the art of the soul, a man so wealthy he was blinded by his own privilege. When he met Marcus in the gutter of their youth, Arthur thought he had found a diamond in the rough. Marcus had played the part of the noble poor to perfection. He would spend his last few cents, money he'd actually stolen from elsewhere, to buy Arthur a meal, ensuring Arthur felt the crushing weight of a poor man's generosity. Arthur had been moved to tears by Marcus's hard work. He set Marcus up in business, secretly funding him through shell companies to protect Marcus's pride. He thought he was a silent guardian. In reality, Marcus was the one holding the leash. His father would describe the sun-drenched plaza, the sudden glint of a sniper's barrel, and the way Marcus, a man who supposedly had nothing, didn't hesitate to throw his body in front of the lead meant for Arthur. That single, jagged scar on Marcus's shoulder became a holy relic in the Johnson household. Because Kayleen hadn't been born yet to see the cracks in the performance, he grew up with a blind, ironclad faith in Uncle Marcus. In reality, it was a flawless piece of theater. That single scar earned Marcus total entry into the Johnson empire. From that moment on, Marcus wasn't a partner. He was the Shadow King. While Arthur built with vision, Marcus destroyed with cunning and ruthlessness. He was a termite in the foundation, embezzling and rerouting funds until the Johnson name was a hollow shell. The day Arthur finally saw the truth, the day he realized his brother was a parasite, he had confronted Marcus. Arthur had walked away, still holding enough legal leverage to ruin Marcus. But Marcus didn't play by the rules of law. He played by the rules of the grave. Within 48 hours, a mechanical failure had claimed Arthur and his wife, leaving the empire and the young Kayleen in Marcus's blood-stained hands. Marcus had walked into the will hearing with a predatory grin hidden behind a funeral veil. His plan was surgical. As the guardian of a minor heir, he would have absolute, unfettered access to every account, every deed, and every secret vault. He intended to drain the empire dry while protecting Kayleen, only to eliminate the boy once the last cent was moved. To Marcus, eliminating Kayleen's Uncle Julian and Aunt Eleanor seemed like a minor inconvenience, a task he could complete as easily as crushing an ant. But Arthur's trusting nature had been guarded by the sharp instincts of Julian and Eleanor. They had anticipated sabotage and forced a protective codicil into the estate. The intervention of Uncle Julian and Aunt Eleanor had moved the empire into a restricted trust. Kayleen, blinded by Marcus's manipulation, saw his aunt and uncle as greedy usurpers. The moment Kayleen turned 18, he exercised his legal right to strip Julian and Elena of all access to the company. He handed the keys back to Uncle Marcus. Within a single year, Marcus systematically bled the company dry. He funneled Johnson capital into disastrous investments designed to fail, while simultaneously awarding massive completion contracts to shell companies he privately owned. Under Kayleen's own signature, the Johnson empire was declared bankrupt. When Marcus finally had what he wanted, Kayleen became a loose end. As Marcus moved in for the kill, it was the villains, Julian and Elena, who came to his rescue. In a final desperate act of love, they extracted Kayleen and smuggled him out of the country, ensuring he had a complete change of identity. To stop Marcus from hunting him, they orchestrated a horrific final act. They ignited their own home, placing a body inside to be recovered and identified as Kayleen. They sacrificed their lives in the inferno to buy the boy time to disappear. Marcus won the company, but he buried a ghost. Scene 2, The Trap. Back in the neon glow of the office, Marcus reached out a trembling hand. Kayleen, your father. He trusted me. Julian and Eleanor were the ones who bankrupted you and then died in that fire. I'm all you have left. Marcus's eyes welled with practiced tears as he leaned in, his voice dropping into a comforting, manipulative purr. Everything I did it for you, Kayleen. I believed in you. I knew that if you stayed in that soft, padded Johnson world, you'd never become the one I see today. I pushed the company to the brink to harden you, to make you grow bigger than your father ever was. It was a test, son, a trial by fire. He shook his head, a look of profound pity for the dead on his face. Your uncle and aunt, they were so small-minded, so paranoid. They didn't need to send you away. They didn't need to create that horrific scenario or stage that fire. They panicked because they didn't understand the greatness I was building in you. Their deaths? That's on their own hands, Kayleen. They chose to play martyrs, when all I wanted was to see you rise. Kayleen's shoulders trembled. He didn't look up. Instead, he seemed to cave in further, his head nearly touching the desk in a posture of total surrender. A trial by fire, Kayleen whispered, his voice small and shaky, repeating Marcus's words like a prayer. To make me bigger, to harden me. You're right, Uncle. You've always been right. Marcus exhaled, a ragged, triumphant sound. He reached out to pat Kayleen's hand, believing he had successfully re-anchored his puppet. Like father, like son, Marcus sneered inwardly. Arthur was a weak-willed fool who fell for a fake bullet, and his whelp is no different. A few tears, a little talk of legacy, and the boy folds just like a Johnson should. They are a bloodline of sheep, born to be sheared by men like me. That's my boy, Marcus said aloud. You see it now, don't you? I see it, Kayleen whimpered, his voice thick with a fake, watery gratitude. My father, the fool he was. He never truly gave you a chance to grow on your own, did he? He kept you in his shadow, feeding you scraps from his table. He stifled you. He didn't understand that a man like you needed to be pushed to the edge to show his true strength. Kayleen finally looked up, his eyes wide and moist, mimicking the blind faith of his childhood. He looked every bit the broken boy Marcus wanted. "And that's why I'm doing the same for you now, Uncle," Kayleen said, his voice dropping into a terrifyingly soft, meek tone. "I'm giving you that same chance to grow big. I've frozen every one of your personal accounts. I've leaked the records of those shell companies to the federal auditors. You're bankrupt, Marcus. You're alone. The world is finally going to see what you're made of when you have nothing left but your hard work, just like you did for me. Now is your chance to rise, Uncle." "You think you've won because you've emptied the vaults?" Marcus's voice was a low, guttural vibration. The shivering old man was gone. In his place stood a man who had built a throne on a foundation of bone. "You think numbers on a screen make you a titan? You're still a novice, Kayleen, just like your father." Marcus leaned over the yellow desk, his shadow stretching long and jagged across the emerald floor. "Your father was a pathetic, sentimental fool," Marcus spat, his lip curling in genuine disgust. "He died wondering why his brother didn't come to save him. And those two idiots, Julian and Eleanor, they thought they were heroes. They burned themselves alive for a brat who spent his youth spitting on their names. They were sheep, Kayleen. Soft, bleeding heart sheep who believed that love was a viable currency in this world. I didn't just kill them. I erased them because they were too weak to exist in the same air as me." He stepped closer, his eyes fixed on Kayleen with a terrifying, singular focus. "I'm going to take away your everything. Not your company, not your name. I'm going to strip you of the very air in your lungs. I'm going to make you wish you had stayed in that fire with those two failures you call family. I'll dismantle your soul piece by piece until there is nothing left but the realization that you are exactly like them. A victim." Kayleen smiled again. There was no sneer of triumph, no spark of contempt. He looked far removed from the petty emotions of revenge. He looked at the man who had just insulted his entire bloodline and spoke with a terrifying, airy lightness. "Try it, Uncle." It was a challenge issued with the crystalline confidence of a man who believed the war was over because the money had changed hands. But in that moment of victory, Kayleen made his greatest mistake. He had forgotten the man who had stood in the sun-drenched plaza and orchestrated a bloodbath. He had forgotten that Marcus Vane didn't need a bank account to be lethal. He didn't realize that by insulting the dead, Marcus wasn't just venting, he was marking Kayleen for the same grave. Scene 3, the sanctuary and the past. Kayleen stepped out of the vibrant neon-soaked office, leaving the echo of Marcus's threats behind the heavy soundproof doors. He didn't stop at the penthouse elevator. Instead, he took the service stairs down to a cramped, forgotten corner of the floor. The door opened into a space no larger than an assistant's cubicle. This was Kayleen's actual office, his sanctuary. There was no electric teal or acid green here. The room was awash of warm walnut browns and soft creams. It smelled of damp earth and cedar. Small terracotta pots held thriving pothos and snake plants, their green leaves glowing softly under a warm desk lamp. It was the only room in the building where he could breathe. It wasn't a room for a king. It was a room for a man who had once had nothing and wanted to remember the value of simple things. Kayleen climbed onto the wide wooden window sill, sitting with one knee pulled to his chest. He looked out at the city skyline, his hand moving instinctively to his inner suit pocket. His fingers brushed against a velvet box. Inside sat a ring, simple, gold, and heavy with a future he hadn't dared dream of 10 years ago. Today, he was going to propose to Lin Rainer. He had already made the decision. The Johnson name was finished. It was a name written in the blood of his father and the soot of his uncle and aunt's sacrifice. When he married Lin, he would become Kayleen Rainer. He wanted a name that stood for the man who had worked himself to the bone, while Kayleen was too blinded by trauma to see it. He wanted a name that tasted of salt and survival, not gold and ghosts. 10 years ago, Kayleen was a 19-year-old, broken prince, shivering in a foreign port city. He remembered the rain, slicking the neon-lit bricks, and the weight of the wool coat Lin had draped over his shoulders. The world is too cold to stand in this alley alone. Come on. At first, Kayleen had no idea how to deal with poverty due to his upbringing. His good looks had somehow become his curse. Soon, he learned to snatch before dogs, and sometimes share with the same dogs. His androgynous looks started attracting malicious intent. Due to his natural build and expertise in self-defense, he was able to protect himself. But one night, when hunger pangs got to him and he was beaten inches to his death, he had almost given in, to be only saved by Lin. Lin had taken him in. Back then, Kayleen was a jagged nerve of trauma. He didn't know what Lin wanted. He didn't trust a soul. At the time, Lin, a vibrant optimist, lived life with flamboyant defiance. Kayleen remembered the first morning in Lin's cramped apartment. He had washed away the grime of the docks and stepped out of the bathroom. Even haggard and bruised, Kayleen was a textbook beauty. Lin, who was making tea, had looked up and simply stopped. He had burned his hand on the kettle, becoming a stuttering, blushing mess. 19-year-old Kayleen had watched this with a cold, internal sneer. Of course, he had thought, he's just like the others. He wants the body. But Lin never touched him. Instead, Lin changed. As the weeks turned into months, the flamboyant persona vanished. Lin knew that the world was cruel to people like him, and if he was going to protect Kayleen, he needed a respectable income. He traded his colorful silks for the drab, grease-stained overalls of the shipyards. He worked double shifts, his hands becoming calloused and scarred, just so he could force Kayleen to attend night school. Sitting on the windowsill now, Kayleen felt a sharp pang of guilt. Back then, he hadn't been moved at all. He had been a stone, cold and unyielding. He hadn't understood that Lin's stuttering and blushing weren't signs of a predator, but the reactions of a man who was hopelessly, selflessly in love. Lin had buried his own flamboyant soul to build a fortress where Kayleen could heal. "I was the fool," Kayleen whispered to the empty room, "not my father." He looked at the ring. He was proposing because he finally understood that while Marcus Vane taught him how to hate, Lin Rainer had spent 10 years teaching him how to live. Scene 4. The tragedy. Lin stood in the center of their new penthouse. He was dressed in a couture suit that cost more than his first 3 years of dock work combined. He looked like the partner of a titan, but he felt like an intruder. In the beginning, their apartment was a contrast of light and shadow. Lin was a burst of energy, working 3 jobs. While Lin worked until his feet bled, Kayleen became a ghost in front of a screen. Lin would come home at 3 a.m., smelling of grease and city rain, only to find Kayleen still awake, his eyes bloodshot and fixed on a future of cold vengeance. By 25, the world knew Kayleen Johnson as a titan. He moved through the world of high finance not to build a life, but to dismantle Marcus. Meanwhile, Lin's own hustle had exploded. But while Kayleen thrived in the cold boardrooms, Lin hated the spotlight. To Lin, money was never about power. He loved Kayleen silently, without ever asking for a return on his 10-year investment. He wanted a partner. Kayleen was infected with revenge. As the war with Marcus entered its final phase, the silence in their penthouse became a physical weight. Lin traded his vibrant wardrobe for muted tones, trying to blend in. He began to feel like a relic, a smudge of grease on a diamond. His heart kept sinking with the thought that he was no longer a partner, but a debt Kayleen felt obligated to pay. Kayleen sat in the deepening shadows of his small office, the gold ring catching the last sliver of sunset. His phone sat face down on the desk. It had buzzed 3 minutes ago, a call from Lin. Kayleen had ignored it, a small, playful smile tugging at his lips. He didn't want to hear Lin's voice yet. He was too afraid he would breathe a hint of the surprise. The phone chimed again, a voicemail. Kayleen picked it up, his thumb trembling as he hit play. "Hey, I know you're busy with the board. I realized you forgot what day it is. It's been 10 years, Kayleen. 10 years since that alley. I'm heading to the docks, to that old pier where we used to sit. I thought, maybe if I went back there, I could find the version of us that wasn't so quiet. I'll wait for an hour. If you don't come, I'll understand. I love you." Kayleen's heart plummeted. The anniversary. He stood up, grabbing his keys, his mind racing with the need to reach the docks and drop to his knees. He sprinted for the stairs. He didn't know he had left his lifeline behind. He left, a gravelly, monotone voice reported over the sound of a car idling in the distance. "Follow him," replied a second voice. It was a cold, cruel purr. "Ensure that history is repeated. Make it a perfect copy of what happened to the fool." Copy that. The sounds that followed were visceral, the screech of tearing metal, and the violent rhythmic thud of a vehicle rolling over. A heavy, wet silence followed, broken only by a ragged, whistling breath. Inside the wreckage, a hand, slick with blood and trembling, scraped across the debris. It reached the phone, dialing. But the call didn't ring out. It went straight to the cold, digital mechanicalness of a voicemail greeting. "Bye," a whisper. It wasn't a peaceful farewell. It was the sound of a disappointed, dying soul, convinced in its last heartbeat that he was dying in the cold of an unrequited love. The line went dead. The phone on the desk darkened. The Price of Revenge is a 3-part story. The part 1 ends here.